Okay? It has a different nucleotides and different nucleic acid that codes proteins. Okay? So there are normally three combination of nucleotides that will translate into a protein. So those amino acids dictates what our structure will be. Okay? So ganyan siya, ganyan yung protein. Kasi sabi natin na siya ay primary. And it is also taught, or there are theories that the first cell or the first one cell organism started because of combining different amino acids. Okay, so there are some theories regarding that. So when we say proteins, we're talking about a combination of different peptides. So mamaya makikita ninyo what are these peptides. Okay, so ibig sabihin combination siya of different peptides. Therefore, this is a polypeptide. Ibig sabihin ay maraming peptide. And these peptides actually contains amino acid. So the reason why it is called amino acid, because it has a carboxylic acid end. If you can still recall our discussion on lipids, di ba hindi discuss tayo doon na carboxylic acid end? The protein also has a carboxyl group or a carboxylic acid end. The difference is it also contains an amino group. Okay? That's why the building block of protein is called amino acid residues. Okay? Because of that. And these combinations of different amino acids dictates what will be the structure of our proteins, of the different proteins in our body. Proteins are very functional. There are a lot of functions, no, for our proteins. Number one, so tama yung mga sinagot, mga nagsagot ng enzymes. That is correct. It also provides structure, no, for our body. Kung bakit tayo minsan pitit. O kaya pag nag-gym tayo, di ba, lumalaki yung biceps and triceps because of proteins. Kung paano nagpa-function yung ating muscle, nagko-contract, kung paano tayo nakakagalaw is also because of proteins. Proteins also is very important in nerve impulses, no, sa mga receptors ng ating katawan, yung mga synapses, kung paano natin nafe-feel if that's cold or hot, ang merong assistance, no, from our protein bago dun sa receptors. For example, our eye contains protein. That's why it can detect different images, different colors. Then correct din ang mga nagsagot na ang protein ay important in repair of cell, important in the cell cycle, kasi maraming parts ng ating cell is composed of protein. And of course, in our diet, it is also important to intake proteins because there are proteins that cannot be produced by our body. Okay, there are amino acids that need to be sourced out from the diet. Okay, so all proteins, ito lahat ng proteins natin contains a peptide bond. Before you can classify it as a protein, you need to combine different amino acid, a polymer. That's why we call this polypeptide, because there are different sequences, a lot of sequences of amino acids to create a protein. Generally speaking, there are around 20 amino acids in nature. Okay? So around 20. Halimbawa, tayo as human, meron tayong around 20 sa ating body. If i-break down natin yung protein sa ating katawan, makakuha tayo ng 20 different amino acid. Okay? And para ma-create yung different proteins in our body, very important yung right sequence, right coding of these different amino acid. May isa lang, no? May isa lang na mamali or one incorrect coding of amino acid in our protein, it may cause some diseases. It may cause a bad effect, no, in our body. So mamaya meron akong example na ibibigay sa inyo, no, later sa ating discussion. And again, these amino acids are coded by the nucleotides in our genetic code. So sa ating midterm, pag-aaral natin nucleic acid, madadaanan natin again yan. Kung ano bang mga nucleotides, halimbawa, ay magpo-produce ng methionine. Methionine is an amino acid. Anong combination of nucleotides? Yung ita-translate into that amino acid. But generally speaking, this is the structure of our amino acid. Okay, this one. Okay. Etong nasa taas natin. All of amino acid contains this portion. Okay, this portion, the one I encircled. The only difference between amino acid is the R. I hope you can still recall the introduction I gave you on organic chemistry. When we say R, this is a side chain, no? Any side chain, any carbon side chain. But there's one exemption for that. Mamaya makikita nyo kung ano yun. But generally speaking, ganito yung ating mga amino acid. Okay? Ito naka-encircle. Then, there is a side chain. Dito nagkakaiba-iba. Okay? This is the reason why there are a lot of amino acids because of this side chain. And so because different side chain is a different amino acid. Then again, we call this an amino acid because there is an amino group and the carboxylic acid portion. Diba? Parang sa lipids, meron tayo sa lipids na ganitong portion. So this portion is the carboxylic acid. So amino, when we see NH2 or NH, NH3, we call that as amino functional group. And it is connected to a carboxylic acid. That's why we call this as amino acids. Amino acids are considered as alpha amino acids. Why? Because in organic chemistry, we call this carbon, this one, right after the carbonyl group of the carboxylic acid, right after this carbon, the next carbon, we call that as the alpha carbon. Okay, this is the alpha carbon. And our amino group is connected to the alpha carbon. That's why we're calling this alpha amino acids. Okay, so actually all of amino acids has this general structure, an alpha amino acid. Okay, so let's talk about some characteristic of proteins. As I've told you earlier, proteins are more complex than carbohydrates and lipids. And it is all because of the different amino acid. There are 20, right? 20 amino acid. For example, in our body as human, you can form different combinations of this amino acid to create proteins. So proteins are very large polymers, a large molecule. If you'll compare glucose to hemoglobin, glucose has a molecular weight of 180. Okay, 180 yung kanyang molecular weight, gram per mole or atomic mass unit. And the hemoglobin, one of the protein in our body, is 65,000. Diba? Ang laki ng difference nilang dalawa. One of the smallest protein, the insulin, has an atomic weight of 6,000 or molecular weight rather. Molecular weight of 6,000. Compare natin yan with glucose. That is 180 only. Okay, so ganyan, no? Ganyan kalaki yung sizes of our proteins. And as you can see, this insulin have 51 number of amino acid residues. 51 combinations of amino acids, okay, to form the insulin, no, in our body. So insulin, it regulates carbohydrates and sugar in our body, is actually a protein. Okay? And here are the other protein in our body: cytochrome, the growth hormone released by our glands. Rhodopsin, the receptor in our eye, is actually a protein. Hemoglobin, a part of a part of the blood of the red blood cells, actually is also a protein. 574 different amino acid para ma-form natin yung hemoglobin. Myosin is found in our muscles. Kung bakit nagko-contract yung muscle natin. 800,000 yung kanyang molecular weight. And 6,100 combinations of amino acid residues para ma-create yung myosin natin. And dahil yung protein, malaki yung sizes, the tendency is it doesn't freely go out of our cells. Hindi yan basta-basta makakalabas. Unlike with glucose, for example, it can easily pass through our cell membranes. Sodium chloride, it can also easily pass through our cell membranes. But for protein, it doesn't, no? Kasi nga malaki yung protein. So hindi yan normal, no? It is not normal that protein passes through our cell membranes. Paano siya nakakalabas sa cell membranes natin? It can only move out of the cell membrane if the cell itself is damaged, either by a trauma or a disease. Kaya there are times that protein is measured in the blood and in urine to look for signs or symptoms or to diagnose a certain disease. Okay? Dahil nga, yung protein natin, hindi siya basta-basta nakakalabas ng cell unless ma-damage yung cell natin. Anyone familiar with creatinine? Normally kasi CREA siya binabanggit ng mga doctors. Creatinine. Sino ang familiar? Chat nyo nga. Ano yung creatinine? Or CREA? Mas common siya sa term na CREA ng mga doktor. O kung meron kayong parent dati, or meron kayong magulang, minsan check kasi yan sa blood, sa urine, no? Yung CREA. Sige, ano nga yung CREA? Ayun. Creatinine, ha? Creatinine. Creatinine. Ayan, may mga nagsasagot pa. Wait lang, ha? Ayan, may 4 na nag-try. May matapang na may mga malakas ang loob. What is a creatinine? And I do not know kung iniinom nga ito ng mga nagma-muscle build, no? Ayan, tama naman, no? Tama naman yung sagot ninyo na waste product siya. Okay, waste product siya ng muscles. Halimbawa, nag-gym ka o kaya ay tumakbo ka. Nagpo-produce kasi yan ng waste product. Okay, so po-produce siya ng creatinine. Tama din yung nagsagot na pwede magkaroon ng complications sa kidney. Actually, asan yung isang nagsagot na yun? Okay. So ginagamit din siya to diagnose if your kidney is functioning well. Pag kasi nakita na yung CREA mo mataas or yung CREA halimbawa ng kung sino man na kamag-anak ninyo mataas, ibig sabihin yan hindi nag-function ng maayos yung kidney. Bakit? Kasi nga yung CREA or creatinine is a waste product ng ating protein or ng ating muscles. The normal function of our kidney is to digest it. Okay, to convert it into other product. Yun yung normal function of our kidney. Yun nga lang kapag may damage ang yung kidney, it's a possibility na hindi niya na-digest ng maayos or na-convert ng maayos yung creatinine. Kaya nag-a-appear siya sa urine. Okay? So, ganyan, no? Ganyan yung isang possible na makita natin sa urine. Lalo na kayo pa nag-work kayo, baka may encounter nyo ulit si CREA pag kayo ay nag-work na as nurses. So sabi diyan, persistent large amounts of protein in the urine may be an indicative of damaged kidney cells. Okay? So persistent, no? Pwede kasi minsan mataas yung protein sa ihi because of a certain trauma, kung halimbawa na aksidente, ganyan, nagkaroon ng internal bleeding, possible naman yan. Pero kung persistent na lagi, kahit after the trauma na, is an indicative na may problema yung kidney natin. Okay? Another is, may nag-chat, may humabol. Yes, normally, no, kapag hindi ko kabisado yung limit for our body sa CREA, pero once na ma-detect na yung CREA is sobrang taas na kasi, tama, nagda-dialysis na, no? Nagkakandak na ng dialysis yung isang tao kapag mataas yung CREA. Kasi waste product nga siya and yung kidney, hindi na niya, yung kidney niya nung tao na yun ay hindi na kaya. No? Hindi niya kayang linisin yung yung body natin. Okay? From the CREA. Okay? So kaya ganoon. Kaya nagda-dialysis na kadalasan. Kasi nga, kaya naman ida-dialysis kasi yung kidney hindi na nag-function ng maayos. Ayan, kabisado yata ni Jan Cornell kung ano ang CREA. No, I forgot na kung ano ang limit diyan eh. Okay, then another na pwede nating maging basis. Halimbawa, nagkaroon ng heart attack. Sumabog yung cells in the heart. Merong mga cells in the heart na doon lang nakikita. Merong mga protein na sa heart lang nakikita. And if ever na nagkaroon ng heart attack yung isang tao and na-detect yun sa blood, mako-confirm na nagkaroon talaga ng heart attack yung person na yun. Okay? So, anong cell na nga? What cell yung nasa heart natin? What kind of cell? If you can still recall in your anaphysio. Anong kind ng cell? Kahit yung di complicated na pangalan, kahit yung simple lang. Ano po ulit? What kind of cell is found in our heart? Char. Ano pa? Mas particular pa, no? Marami kasing smooth muscle. Ano pa? Maliban. Ayun, may nakita akong tumama. Wow, may fibroblast pa siya, oh. Okay. Yung cardiac, yan. Cardiac, no? Cardiac cells. Yes. Kung ano pa yung ibang tawag dyan, tama naman yan. No? Basta something with cardiac. Okay, kaya nga may cardiac attack, di ba? Pag inatake sa puso, may cardiac attack. And the way to test kung cardiac attack nga siya, to verify it, is to test the blood of the patient. If there are proteins that only exist in the blood, in the heart, that is in the blood after the test, you can confirm that there's a possible heart attack. Why? Kasi nga, proteins are large. It cannot easily pass through sa cell membranes. Okay? Ibig sabihin, nagkaroon ng damage yung mga cardiac muscles natin. Okay? Because of that. Okay? So, because of the damage cardiac cells, lumabas yung mga proteins na nandoon inside our heart. Okay? So, that is one of the importance of knowing knowing how large our protein. Kasi, yun nga, hindi siya normal na lalabas in our cell membranes. So, pwede natin siyang gamitin for diagnostics purposes ng mga patients. Another characteristics of protein is the acid-base properties. Anong ibig nating sabihin dyan? There are some amino acids or proteins that act as an acid, and there are some amino acid or protein that act as a base. And proteins actually are called sweeter ions. Ano ba ibig sabihin yan, sweeter ions? Sweeter ions means they have two charges. Balikan natin yung kanina. Eto. They have two charges, di ba? Yung amino acids natin dito. Meron siyang isang positive, meron isang negative. That is why this is called a sweeter ion. Because of the existence of two charges in its natural form. And different amino acid have different isoelectric points. This means that this is the normal or natural pH of that particular amino acid. So why it is important? Isoelectric points can dictate how amino acid will behave in a certain solution. For example, an amino acid has a isoelectric point of around 6 or 7. Kapag nilagay mo yan in a certain solution with a pH na malayo doon sa kanyang isoelectric point, the tendency is maghihiwa-hiwalay yung iyong proteins. Maghihiwa-hiwalay yung mga amino acids of your proteins. Because of that. Kaya nga, lumalambot yung karne kapag nilalagyan natin ng tenderizer, nilalagyan natin ng mga enzymes, halimbawa papain, pineapple. Okay, nagkakaroon kasi ng repulsion. Because of the pH of the solution. Okay, kasi malaki yung difference ng pH ng solution. Kapag naman yung pH is near the isoelectric point of our amino acid, the tendency of this amino acid is they form clumps. They clump together, they form precipitate in that solution. Nagdidikit-dikit sila. Okay, mas nagiging attracted sila toward one another kapag near yung pH in the isoelectric point. Okay? So, punta naman tayo. Mas detail lang natin i-discuss yung different functions of our proteins. Unang-una sa lahat is the catalytic function. Di ba when we say catalyst, pampabilis yan. Okay? So that the biological reactions and biological processes in our body will be faster. So, isa sa mga biological catalysts in our body is enzymes. Last week, di ba, meron na tayong na-discuss na isang enzyme that digest lipids. Ano na nga yun? What enzyme digest lipids in our discussion last week? Tatandaan pa ba? Ayan, may mabilis mag-type. Tama, Jimrad. Ayan, tama rin sa Ashley, no? Ayan, na-recall. Good, very good. Nicole, Jen Cornell, tama. Correct. Okay, this is the enzyme that helps in digestion of lipids. Yan. So, lipase, di ba? Lipase or lipase. Depende kung saang bansa ang pagka-pronounce. Okay, lipase. So, from the word lipid and ACE kasi ACE ay enzyme ang ibig sabihin yan. So, next week, enzyme ang topic natin. Makikilala nyo pa yung ibang enzyme. Not all enzyme naman kasi ay digestion lang yung ginagawa nila. There are other enzymes that have different properties. So next week, pag-aaralan natin yan. And those enzymes actually are proteins. Okay, combination of different amino acids. Yung mga enzymes na yan. If we do not have an enzyme in our body, the protein in those enzymes, the amino acids on those enzymes, very slow. Yung mga biological reactions in our body. So we will not function well if ever kulang tayo sa mga enzyme na yan or wala totally nung enzyme na yan. That's why protein is very important. And of course, the structure of our body. Diba yung muscles natin? Diba yung muscles natin is composed actually of proteins. So kung ano yung itsura natin, kung ba tayo singket, is also because of proteins. Kung paano na-develop yung proteins natin. Kung ano ang shape ng ilong, yung labi natin, kung anong kulay, it's because of that. So collagen, ayan, also, actually, ay It's also a kind of protein and it gives a strength, di ba, sa ating skin and bone. Then keratin, yung keratin kasi ay nakikita yan sa kuko or fingernails, toenails, sa hooves of different animals, in hairs, feathers. Actually, those are keratins or basically those are proteins. Storage function. So there are proteins that is stored in different animals. For example, the egg white. The egg white in the egg. Or simply the ovalbumin. Simply ba yan? Mas mahirap pala, no? Or the albumin or ovalbumin. Actually, those are stored proteins para doon sa development ng bird inside the egg. Okay? Kaya tanggalin mo ang egg white, hindi magpo-progress yung embryo ng bird kasi kailangan niya yan para lumaki siya ng maayos. Milk also contains protein, the protein casein. Wheat seeds have gliadin. Our liver actually also consists of a protein called ferritin. So this ferritin actually complexes with ions. Kaya nga pag halimbawa you are low blood or you have a low iron in your body, normally sinasabi nila is to eat liver kasi yung liver natin is rich in iron. Okay? Kasi nga meron siyang protein, the ferritin, that complexes with ions. Kaya liver sometimes tastes like metallic, 'di ba? Parang metallic minsan ang lasa ng liver. Other functions, protective. Yan, yung mga nagsagot kanina ng antibodies. That is correct. Okay, so antibodies actually are proteins that attacks viruses and bacteria in our body. Halimbawa, yung vaccine. Yung vaccine actually are proteins na kinreate ng ating kinreate ng body. Hindi. Sinasaksak sa atin para yung ating katawan mag-create ng antibody. Ay, para mag-create ng antibody yung ating katawan, that antibody is actually a protein. If someone of you is watching Cells at Work, mas makikita nyo yan, no? If you know the anime Cells at Work, and makikita nyo yung mga function nun na yan. And actually, those are protein. For example, the blood clotting, guided by the platelets. Diba? Halimbawa, nasugatan ka, instead na continuous yung bleeding, the tendency ay mag-blood clot, di ba? Automatic na nagka-close yung sugat because of the protein, thrombin, and the fibrinogen. Ayan, to the rescue. Ayan, nanonood si Paula ng Cells at Work. Yes, to the rescue, yung white blood cells, di ba meron diyang mga macrophages na binabanggit. Platelets, yung maliliit na bata. Para sa Cells at Work, yung maliliit na bata, yung platelets, tapos gumagawa sila ng net. So, ganun nag-work, no, yung blood clotting. Kung makapanood nyo yung anime na yun, Cells at Work, mas mabivisualize niyo, no, what is happening in our body. Next, regulatory function, the growth hormone. Okay? So there are a lot of hormone actually, hindi lang growth hormone, hindi lang thyroid hormones. Meron pa mamaya, no? Meron pa tayong makikita dyan na different hormones that is also a protein. Then, as I've mentioned earlier, it helps in transmission of stimulus in our body, of the nerve impulses, kung paano tayo nakakakita because of rhodopsin. No? Merong protein in our eye, the rhodopsin, that aids in vision. How do we perceive things? How do we feel things? Yan. Is also assistant, no? Nag-a-assist yung protein dyan. Then movement, di ba? Kung paano tayo nakakalakad. How do we run? How do we walk? How do we pick up things? It's also because of different proteins, no? Mga muscle fibers. Halimbawa, yung actin and myosin. These are important protein in contraction of muscle fibers. Kung paano natin na igagalaw yung ating mga muscles is because of this protein, the actin and myosin. Ay, naka-ano pa lang video ko. Okay? The last crucial functions of protein is the transport proteins. Actually, nabanggit natin yan last week. Di ba may nabanggit tayo last week? Yung mga LDL, ano na nga yun? Sige nga, ano na yung mga lipid transport natin? Which is actually, siya din ay transport protein. Hindi lang siya transport lipids, transport protein din yun. Ayan, yung last week natin na topic, yung mga LDL. Ayan, tama, Eliza. Yung nasa dulo, ayan, no? So those are, oo nga, naka-caps lock. Ayan, so those are lipoproteins. Kaya nga lipoproteins yung tawag natin doon, di ba? Kasi may lipid siya, meron din siyang protein. Okay? So, for example, the albumin. Albumin is also a transport protein. Anong ginagawa niya? It carries different fats, no? Fatty acids in tissues and other organs. So, parang yung mga lipoproteins din natin, di ba? Yung serum albumin. Yun din yung parang role niya. Hemoglobin is also a protein. Ano naman ang kine-carry niya? Oxygen. Sa cells at work, yung mga nakakulay pula. Diba? Yung red blood cells natin, may hemoglobin yan. So actually, that is a protein also. Transferrin, carrier of iron naman in our body. So nasa blood plasma naman yan. So very important yung protein. Napakadami niyang function sa ating katawan. Diba? Sobrang dami niya. And our cells, diba? We have a lot of cells in our body. And as I've told you in our first meeting, diba, kung sa anaphysio and biology, you're looking at the microscope to see the different cell. In biochemistry, we will dive further. Diba? We will dive further and we will look what those cells contain. So isa to sa mga content ng ating cell, the protein. Normally, a human cell has 9,000 different proteins. And those proteins have hundreds and thousands different amino acid. Diba? So napakadami. And our body contains around 100,000 different proteins so far. Kasi so far, yan yung nadidiscover ng mga scientists natin. Pero probably, baka mas madami pa dyan. Kasi day by day, they discover new proteins in our body that have a special function. Oh, here are some examples of proteins that performs crucial role in our body. So as catalyst, yung mga enzymes natin like lactate dehydrogenase, DNA polymerase, and ayan sa third column yung nasa third column yung kanyang mga role in our body. Ano pa bang enzyme? Yung nagda-digest ng alcohol in our body, the alcohol dehydrogenase. Yan pag nainom ng alak, no? Halimbawa ay pag nainom ka ng alak, 'di ba, nagiging tipsy when you drank some beers or some alcohol, 'di ba? Nagiging tipsy, no? Tapos nagka-hangover. It's because of that, because of the conversion of alcohol by using alcohol dehydrogenase. Okay? That is a catalyst. Sa structure, ayan, merong alpha keratin, beta keratin, the glycoproteins, if you can still recall the topic on oligosaccharide and blood typing. Di ba meron tayo dong glycoproteins. Halimbawa, yung glucosamine, galactosamine, those actually are proteins. Okay? Collagen, the fibrous connective tissue in our body, the elastin, the elastic connective tissue. And here are the storage of albumin, casein, and nabanggit naman na natin kanina. Okay? Proceed tayo ngayon sa structure. Structure of proteins. As I've mentioned repeatedly, proteins is very complex biomolecules relative to lipids and carbohydrates. So ito yung dahilan kung bakit. Because of its structure. But generally speaking, on the structure of proteins, we can classify it based on their shapes. One is fibrous protein. The another classification is globular proteins. So what does it mean? Fibrous proteins, from the word itself, fibrous, it means fiber, right? So this means that these proteins looks like fibers, looks like strings, looks like cables or ropes. No, parang ganyan yung mga fibrous proteins natin. For example, yung hair na lang, 'di ba? Yung hair, diretso siya. Actually, hair is also a fibrous protein. The muscles in our body is also a fibrous protein. Halimbawa, nagkatay ka ng karne, no? You cook some beef. You pan-seared a beef. 'Di ba makikita mo yung grain nung meat natin? Makikita mo may parang hibla-hibla siya because those are proteins, fibrous proteins. And these fibrous proteins, normally, they are insoluble in water. They cannot mix well with water. Okay, that is one of the property of these proteins. The other kind or classification of protein based on shape is the globular protein. From the word itself, globular, it means globe, round, spherical. Ayan, ganyan yung mga globular protein. And these proteins, okay, they love water, they dissolve in water, they also form stable suspensions. Halimbawa, yung mga transport natin na protein, lipoprotein. If you can still recall the lipoprotein discussion, di ba pabilog siya? Pabilog ang lipoproteins. And as I mentioned earlier in our discussion last week, it can freely move in water. Di ba? Pinaliwanag ko yan last time. So ganyan, di ba? Globular siya. Pabilog, spherical. Para madali siya makapag-travel in our blood. Okay? So that it will be easier for those protein to travel kasi nagta-transport siya ng different nutrients. Another example, the hemoglobin, yung red blood cells natin. But the red blood cells transfers oxygen all throughout the body. And it is also, di naman sphere na sphere, pero medyo circular, di ba, yung kanyang shape ng hemoglobin natin. So ganyan yung mga globular proteins. And as I've mentioned, again, repeatedly, structure of protein is very complex. It's very complex. And we can define its structure in 4 different levels. The primary structure, the secondary structure, the tertiary, and the quaternary structure. So this structure dictates what will be the final shape, final structure of our protein by combining these different levels of structure. Proceed tayo with primary structure. This is the simplest structure. What is the difference of primary structure with other structure? Primary structure is the linear sequence of the amino acids. Okay, linear sequence. The protein backbone. Straight lang siya. Okay, dire-diretso lang. For example, this one. This is the protein backbone. Asan yung mga amino acid? Dito yung putol niya, no? This is one amino acid unit. This is another amino acid unit. Ay, taka lang, sumobra ako ng bilog. One amino acid unit. Two amino acid unit. Three amino acid unit or amino acid residue. 4, 5. So this protein backbone in our example contains 5 different amino acid. So very simple lang pag primary structure. Parang hindi pa siya 3D. It is a linear sequence. Okay? Linear sequence of different amino acid residues. For example, the insulin have 51, di ba? 51 amino acid residues. So pag pinag-usapan natin, primary structure, ganito lang siya. Linear sequence lang siya. Okay? But the secondary structure, nagiging medyo 3D na yung ating protein. Okay? Parang 3D na yung kanyang structure. 3D na yung kanya, natin siya mabivisualize. And the reason why secondary structure forms this shape is because of hydrogen bonding. So there are two secondary structure, the alpha helix and the beta pleated sheet or simply beta sheet. Dalawa yan. There are two. So the difference first is the difference between them is the location of the hydrogen bonding. Okay, so sa alpha helix looks like a spring or a coil. Ay, parang paikot-ikot yan. Ayan, parang one strand na DNA. One strand lang, hindi double helix. So this is the alpha helix formation of a protein. Again, what is the reason for this? It's because of the hydrogen bonding. What is hydrogen bonding? Hydrogen bonding is not an actual bond. Not a strong bond, not as strong as the real bond of our between carbon and oxygen atoms, for example. When we say hydrogen bonding, if we will parallel it in the real world, it's like a mutual connection, mutual understanding, MU, if you're familiar with MU. So parang MU, yung hydrogen bonding. It's a bond pero parang dotted lang. Ayan o, dotted lang siya. Okay, so yung dilaw kasi natin dyan, the yellow circles, those are hydrogen. And it forms a dotted line bond with the red one or the oxygen. So even though that hydrogen is bonded with nitrogen and the oxygen is bonded in carbon, they form an attraction. Okay? They are attracted towards one another. Kahit in a relationship na sila, kumbaga. No? Kahit in a relationship na yung mga atoms na yan with different atoms, nagkakaroon pa rin ng attraction between the hydrogen and the oxygen. Which oxygen? The one connected with this portion. This one. Ayan, ito. Alam, burahin lang natin. Okay, this portion of oxygen. Ayan, this oxygen is attracted, for example, on this hydrogen. Okay, they form a mutual connection between one another. Yes, so hindi sila loyal, no? Kahit may nakaband na sa kanila, they still connect with other people. Other atom, I'm sorry. Other atom, no? Yung ating hydrogen and oxygen. Ayan, nagpo-form sila. And because of that connection, because of that attraction, nag-i-start, no? Nag-i-start na mag-form yung protein natin. From the linear sequence, the tendency is, because of that attraction, nagkakaroon ng shape, nagkakaroon ng form yung ating protein. For example, hold your thumb with your pinky finger. Okay, or your little finger. Diba? If you're holding your little finger with your thumb, you will form a shape. So parang ganyan lang yung effect ng alpha helix. Okay? It forms a shape because of that reason. Because of that attraction between the two atom of carbon and of oxygen rather and hydrogen. Okay? So this alpha helix, one example is the keratin in our body, the alpha keratin. And alpha helix looks like a spring, a coil, and when it combined together, it forms coil, it forms a rope-like structure. Parang itong image na to in the right. So ganyan yung ating alpha helix. Yung keratin nga, yung nasa buhok natin, actually is meron siyang alpha helix na structure, the basals in our body, the fibrin in blood clotting, etc. No? There are actually a lot pa na example of proteins that contains alpha helix. Even the hemoglobin also contains a alpha helix secondary structure. Another secondary structure is the beta sheets or beta pleated sheets. The difference with beta pleated sheets and alpha helix is the connection. For alpha helix, the connection is top and bottom oxygen and hydrogen. But for beta pleated sheets or beta sheets, they are connected side by side. Ay, kung titingnan ninyo, side by side siya, di ba? Pag ganyan. So may dalawang layer, then side by side yung kanilang connection. Unlike with alpha helix, na nag-form ka ng loop. Kasi taas and baba yung naging connection nilang dalawa. Okay? So there are proteins that contains both of the alpha and helix configuration. So this green color is the protein backbone. Yung linear sequence natin ng protein. Kung wala yung mga beta sheets, wala yung alpha helix, walang hydrogen bonding, straight lang yan. But because of the dotted line between hydrogen bonds, between hydrogen bonding of oxygen and hydrogen, nagkakaroon ng different structure. So basically, ganito yung nagiging structure ng ating protein in secondary kapag meron kang beta pleated sheet. Ito, side by side, yung kanilang interaction. Alpha helix, ayun, nag-form ka ng coil, parang spring kapag alpha helix. Okay, so that is the secondary structure. So punta tayo sa mas complicated, the tertiary structure. As I have mentioned earlier, proteins are combinations of amino acids. And proteins contains different amino acids. And these amino acids have different side chains, di ba? Different R. And those R results to different shape of our protein. Bakit? Kasi nagkakaroon ka ng interaction between those R or side chain. So nagkakaroon ka ng bending, nagkakaroon ka ng folding to create a three-dimensional shape for your protein. So here we have 4 main interactions in our tertiary structure of proteins. The first, please remember this kasi normally this is asked in exams. Okay? Tandaang mabuti itong 4 na to. Kasi normally these are questions in examinations. Okay? So the number 1 tertiary structure is the disulfide bridge. The disulfide bridge can form between 2 cysteine because cysteine is an amino acid that contains sulfur. Okay? It contains sulfur. So combination of 2 sulfur forms a disulfide bridge. So cysteine to specific to for cysteine. Okay? Cysteine na amino acid. It forms a loop. Mamaya meron ako papakita sa inyo na example diyan. Number 2, the salt bridges. Di ba positive and negative attracts together? Positive and negative, nag-a-attract yan. So there are side chains of amino acid that contains positive side. There are amino acid that contains a negative side. And they are attracted towards one another. Kapag na-attract sila towards one another, you form salt bridges. And it also dictates what will protein look like. Okay? So parang huminawakan mo lang yung iyong finger halimbawa. Halimbawa yung kamay mo, no? You have the left and the right hand. Tapos pinagdikit mo yung thumb mo. 'Di ba nag-create ka ng ibang shape? Halimbawa pinagdikit mo yung both thumbs, saka both index finger of your left and right hand. Mag-form ka ng shape, 'di ba? So ganyan na form din yung protein natin. Okay? Nagpo-form siya ng salt bridges. Another is hydrogen bonding. Again, hydrogen bonding. The difference with this hydrogen bonding is it happens at the side chain of the amino acid. Okay, kanina kasi dun sa secondary structure natin, it occurs at the carbonyl group and the carbonyl end and the amino end of our amino acid or molecule. But for tertiary structure, the side chains. Okay, there are side chains or there are amino acid that contains additional carboxyl group, additional amino group. And those amino group forms hydrogen bonding. There are also some amino acid that contains alcohol, functional group, and it can also form a hydrogen bond. Then the last type of interaction for tertiary structure is the hydrophobic interactions. The hydrophobic interactions are interactions that occur in non-polar groups or water-fearing organic functional groups. For example, a benzene ring. A benzene ring generally does not like water. It is not soluble in water, but it forms interaction or weak attraction between other benzene rings. So nagkakaroon din siya ng effect. Okay, it also form as an effect on the structure of our protein. So here are some tertiary structure. Etong nasa una, the one on the left is the structure of lipoproteins and other transport proteins. It's a globular as you can see. Diba, globular siya. And dun sa outer layer niya, okay, itong aqueous region, the part or the portion of the amino acid that is polar, okay, for example, the OH, the C double bond OO negative, NH3 plus, these are polar portions of our amino acids. Okay, and it is exposed in water in our body. Then in the inside, as you can see, is the hydrophobic region. So normally in the inside, diba, it contains different lipids, the triglyceride, the cholesterol, etc. And it is binded with the different non-polar functional group of amino acids. Okay? And here's is another diagram of a tertiary structure of a protein. As you can see, there is a disulfide bridge. No? Because of that disulfide bridge, nagkaroon ka ng parang loop. Diba? Na-close. Na-close yung ating protein backbone. Same way with the salt bridge. No? Attracted kasi yan towards one another. Oy. Towards one another, attracted sila. So, nagiging mas dikit yung protein because of that. Same way with hydrophobic interactions and hydrogen bonding within the side chains of our amino acids. Then the last level of organization of protein structure is the quaternary structure. So the quaternary structure, this happens when two or more polypeptide, okay, they are held together, they are joined together by the different interactions to form the large protein complex as we see it. Okay, so yan na yung quaternary structure. Kapag nagdikit-dikit na yung different polypeptides, yan na yung mas nabivisualize natin na protein natin. So lahat ng protein merong primary, secondary, and tertiary structure. Then to form the large protein, yan na yung quaternary structure natin. Okay? So, pahinga muna, 5 minutes. Let's take a 5 minutes break. Absorb muna natin yung mga na-discuss. Pikit-pikit lang ng konti before tayo mag-proceed with our topic. Sige, pwede kayong mag-bathroom break muna. Or uminom ng tubig. Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes, no? para pahinga muna kayo. Sige, at masyadong marami ng information. Yes, I'll give a recording naman ng lesson natin. Okay, don't worry. And so I'll give you 5 minutes wag kayo, hindi pa tapos ang class. So meron pa, nakakalahati pa lang tayo. Gymrad, i-discuss natin mamaya yan kung ano ang difference ng polypeptide and amino acid. But very good question. So mamaya discuss natin yan. Okay, let's start. So nucleoproteins contains nucleic acid. Lipoproteins contains lipids. No, parang diniscuss lang natin last week, 'di ba, yung lipoproteins. In our first week, diniscuss naman natin yung 'di ba, glycoproteins sa ating carbohydrate na topic. These are proteins that contains carbohydrates. There are also phosphoproteins. These are phosphate groups naman. A protein that contains phosphate groups. Hemoproteins contains heme or na found yan normally sa blood. Ayan, hemoglobin, myoglobin. Then metalloproteins are proteins that contains iron, zinc, and other metals. Okay, merong mga ganong proteins. For example, yung sa digestion of alcohol, no? From alcohol to an aldehyde, kino-convert yan in our body. The alcohol dehydrogenase, it contains zinc. Zinc plus a protein. Then amino acids. The amino acids, these are the building blocks of our peptides. Then the peptides are the building blocks of our proteins. So amino acids are classified into four bases based on the R group that is connected in that amino acid. Okay, it can be neutral. When we say neutral, the R or the side chain is not acidic, not basic. Okay, either. And it can be non-polar or polar. When we say non-polar, the distribution of electron within that side chain is equal. For example, the benzene ring, that is a non-polar neutral amino acid. For example, the tryptophan and phenylalanine, normally they are neutral non-polar. There are also neutral polar group of amino acid. And there are also basic polar amino acid. It contains an additional amino group in its side chain. Acidic or polar amino acid naman, it contains additional carboxylic acid portion on its amino acid side chain. And all of these amino acids can be distinguished by an abbreviation, a 3-letter or a 1-letter abbreviations. Nasa ano natin yan, nasa Canvas modules, those abbreviations. You don't have to memorize all of those naman. Okay, hindi ko naman napapamemorize sa inyo. Kakausapin ko na lang din siguro yung other professors regarding dyan. Kasi ang dami nun. Okay? So, andyan sa ating module yon kung gusto nyo malaman. For example, tryptophan. Tryptophan yung nare-recall ko kasi ang kanyang 1-letter abbreviation is W. Okay? For example, the tryptophan. So, here is an amino acid. As you can see, the amino acid can be shown as an optically active organic compound. Ibig sabihin, it means that it has a chiral center. Diba? May chiral center siya. It contains chiral center. A carbon chiral center. Except for glycine. Mamaya malalaman nyo kung bakit except, no? Except for glycines. Most of the amino acids have a chiral center except for glycine. Mamaya makita nyo bakit ganoon. And dahil, no? Dahil meron siyang carbon chiral center, because of that carbon chiral center, we can also distinguish amino acid as an L amino acid or a D amino acid. How? Okay, parang sa carbohydrates lang din. You will look at the NH3+. Okay, you will look at the NH3+. Then, if the NH3 is in the left side, it means that it is L amino acid. If the NH3 portion is in the right side, that is a D amino acid. And this L amino acid is the most common amino acid in nature. Okay? Halimbawa, L-lysine, L-threonine, L-tryptophan. Most of them are in L form. Ay madalang yung may D. Halimbawa, methionine, meron siyang D and L form. But normally, in living system, the amino acids are L. Okay? L yung kanyang formation. Nandito sa left side, yung NH3. Okay? That is the normal for amino acids. Then amino acids, as I've told you earlier, can be an acid. It has a portion that is basic and a portion that is acidic. Diba? Itong portion na to is carboxylic acid. Therefore, this is an acidic portion. And this portion, the N, is the basic portion of our amino acid. But these portions of amino acid in nature exist as this form, as sweeter ions, meaning they have two charges. The hydrogen in the carboxylic acid is taken away by the nitrogen. Okay? That's why the nitrogen here already have a 3 hydrogen atom. Meanwhile, the oxygen lost one of its hydrogen. But by varying the solution or the pH of the solution, these charges may change. So paano? Ganito siya. Okay? Eto. So this is the effect of pH in amino acid. When we say lowering the pH, okay, tandaan nyo to ha, there are a lot of misconception pag sinabing mataas ang pH. Pag sinabi natin na decrease the pH or lower the pH, it means that the solution is in acidic condition. Okay? When we decrease the pH, we make the solution acidic. When you see a reaction or a solution with H3O plus or simply H plus, it means that that solution is acidic. It means that the pH of that solution is lowered. It means that the pH of the solution is from 1 to 6. Okay, because the pH of water or neutral solution is 7. When the pH is from 6 to 1, it means that the solution is acidic. Okay? Meanwhile, for base, it is from 8 to 14 para masabi natin na base. So pag in-increase mo ang pH, ibig sabihin nun, ginagawa mong basic naman yung iyong solution. So when you lower the pH, you make the solution acidic. Okay? Ibig sabihin, nagdagdag ka ng H plus or H3O plus. The tendency of this sweeter ion that has two charges, the tendency is it will form a positive net charge. Diba? Positive plus negative, zero yan. Diba? Zero net charge. But because of the addition of an acid, or when you put this amino acid in an acidic solution, the tendency is this H3O plus actually is just water with additional hydrogen. Okay? The oxygen will take one of the hydrogen in this H3O plus. That's why the final product in this reaction contains already an OH. The charge of the oxygen becomes 0. Therefore, the NH3 retains its positive charge. Therefore, our product is a positive net charge. Okay? Then when we increase the pH, it means that higher than 7, it means that the solution is basic. The solution has an hydroxide ion. So what happens here is this hydroxide ion takes the excess hydrogen in this nitrogen component. Then it will form water. As you can see, the nitrogen loss its charge and the oxygen's charge remain. Okay, kaya naging negative yung net charge natin for this reaction. So ganyan yung effect ng lowering or increasing of pH in our sweeter ions. Okay? So different amino acids, as I've told you earlier, have different isoelectric point, and it depends on the amino acid side chain or the R group of that side chain. If the R group is neutral, normally the pH is from 6 to around 7. When it becomes a basic amino acid, it becomes 8. The isoelectric point becomes 8 and higher. When it is acidic, it is lower than 6. And our amino acid actually is the reason why the blood's pH is regulated. So normally the blood's pH is around 8, 7 to 8. And it is maintained in that condition because of the property of amino acid, which is it acts as a buffer because it is a sweeter ions. Next reaction for amino acid is the oxidation reaction. Siguro naman yung iba sa inyo ay nakapagpakulot na ng buhok. Maybe some of you have tried curling their hair in parlors. Meron silang nilalagay na chemicals dyan. No, that chemical actually ay nilalagay to prolong the curls of your hair. Kung halimbawa magpapa-curl kayo. Paano? Paano nangyayari yon? Our hair contains cysteine. The amino acid cysteine. So this is the amino acid cysteine. This is the R side chain of our cysteine. Okay, ito yung general, 'di ba? General natin kanina na amino acid formation, and this is the cysteine portion. When you oxidize this cysteine, nagkakaroon ng bonding between the sulfur. Nagkakaroon ng sulfur bridges. So yung nilalagay sa buhok kapag kayo ay nagpapa-curl, actually ay oxidizing agent. Kaya mas matagal yung kulot kapag nilagyan ng chemical na yon, kung ano man yung ginagamit ng mga parlor. Iba-iba kasing ginagamit ng iba't ibang parlor. So pagka nilagay yun, nagkakaroon ng sulfur bridges. That sulfur bridges maintains the curl kapag nagpapa-curl kayo ng inyong mga buhok. Likewise, kung medyo ang buhok natin ay medyo may curls, pag nagpa-rebond, 'di ba? Nagpa-rebond naman tayo, nagiging unat yung ating buhok, nire-reduce naman siya. So the chemical that is being used for that is a reducing agent. That reducing agent removes the bond between sulfur. No, it removes the sulfur bridge or sulfide bridge nung hair natin. Kaya nauunat. No, kaya nauunat yung buhok by adding that reducing agent. Okay, that's one of the reaction of amino acid. Another is the peptide formation. Actually, peptide formation is a chemical reaction of amino acid. So to create a peptide, you need to combine, you need to create an amide. Okay, amide. So this one, amide. Okay, when we say amide, there is a linkage between nitrogen and a carbonyl group. Okay, in the same way, the amino acid, when they combine together, it forms a peptide linkage. Okay? Kaya peptide yung tawag kasi actually that is a peptide bonds. Okay, ito yung peptide bonds or bond or peptide linkage. This is actually an amide linkage. Pero particular tayo sa amino acid, we call this as peptide linkage. So kung paano nakikreate yung ating protein is because of these linkages. So paano nangyayari yan? This nitrogen, for example, this alanine, it reacts with the carbon in this glycine, the carbon in the carbonyl group. Okay? It attacks the carbonyl group to form a bond. Then this oxygen combines with the two hydrogen in this nitrogen to form water. Okay? Then makikreate na yung bond. So ito na yung peptide linkage. Nag-combine yung dalawa. Balikan ko lang yung kanina sa chirality, no? Yung glycine lang yung hindi chiral na amino acid kasi it contains both hydrogen, no? Yung glycine natin. Kaya hindi siya chiral. Okay? Balikan ko lang 'yan. So peptide formation ganyan nangyayari. Yung peptide formation, continuous. So this is already a dipeptide. Kung gusto mo maging tripeptide 'yan, you add another amino acid, that amino acid will react with this carbonyl group to create a tripeptide. Okay, continuous chain 'yan. Ano 'yun? Maxine Lusong, may question ka ba? Nakalagay lang kasi pasensya na po. Maxine, are you still there? Wala. Okay, proceed tayo. Ayan, may nagtanong kanina, what is the difference between polypeptides and protein? So polypeptides are under the classification also of proteins. But by terminology, actually, they are different. When we say polypeptides, it contains 50 to lower na mga amino acid. Halimbawa, you have 9 amino acid. That is a polypeptide. 10 amino acid, 21 amino acid. That is a polypeptide. But if the chain is more than 50 amino acid, we consider it as a protein. Okay? But again, those protein actually contains also polypeptides. Okay? I hope that's clear, no? Yung polypeptides, yes, under siya ng protein na classification. Okay lang. Okay lang naman, Maxine. No? So, under ng, yung polypeptides under siyang protein classification, but we call that polypeptide, and we call that polypeptide, not a protein, unless it contains more than 50 amino acid. That's why we consider insulin as a protein. Diba? Because it contains 51 amino acids. Okay? I hope nasagot ko yung question mo, Jimrad, kanina. Ayan. So, yan yung pinagkaiba ng dalawa. But protein, again, contains polypeptides. Okay? Kasi maraming peptide bond para makreate mo yung protein. And these amino acids have different amino acid residues. And it contains 2 terminal residue. Anong ibig sabihin natin sa terminal? It means the end. Okay? So there is the N-terminal residue and the C-terminal residue. So ano yan? Ano yung mga residue na yan? For N-terminal residue, yan yung nasa left side. Yung example natin kanina, balikan natin. This one. So ito yung N-terminal residue natin. Okay? Then this is the C-terminal residue. Ay, sumobra. C-terminal residue. Yung nasa pinaka-right side. That is the C-terminal residue. Ayan, right end. Yung nasa left end, that is the N-terminal. So how do we name these peptides? Madali lang naman mag-name ng peptides. Yun nga lang, kailangan alam mo yung mga different amino acids. So again, nandun sa Canvas module, yung different amino acids natin. So we have two example here, the ala or in longer words is glycine and alanine. Paano natin papangalanan 'yan? Kung ano yung nasa most right portion, we keep the name of that amino acid. For example, this one, alanine. So we keep that name. Okay? Then for the other amino acid before the C-terminal amino acid, we replace, for example, glycine. We replace the INE or the in with YL. Okay? It will become glycyl. Glycyl, then continue, no spaces, alanine. Okay? Glycyl, alanine. For this example, alan naman yung nauna. Alanine yung nauna. Sumunod yung glycine. So ano ang magiging pangalan ng ating amino acid pag ganito? So what will be the name of this amino acid? Alanine first, then glycine. Sige nga, try. Try nga. Sige, kahit na mamali, okay lang. No, kahit na incorrect. Okay. Medyo nalito. Okay, so ang magiging name niyan, ayan, baka may tumama na. Ayun, actually may tumama na si Eliza. Yan, tumama na si Eliza. Okay lang kahit nanghuhula. So, alanine saka glycine yung combination natin. So, that would be alanil. Okay? Alanil. Kasi alanine, tatanggalin mo lang yung INE. Okay? Tatanggalin mo lang tong INE. Papalitan mo ng YL. So, alanil glycine. And merong nalito, no? Kung ano yung nasa dulo, okay? Automatic kung ano yung name mismo. Wala ka nang papalitan. No? Wala ka nang papalitan doon sa name niya. Automatic na, glycine. Hindi gagawin mong glycyl, ganon, okay? So, alanil glycine. Okay? So, next, ito, meron tayong tripeptide dito. Ang pangalan, alanil glycyl valine. It's because it is a combination of alanine, glycine, and valine. So, try ko nga, baliktarin ko ulit. Valine to valine yung val. O, sige, try natin to. Ganito naman siya. Glycine, valine, yung pagkakasunod, and huli, yung alanine. Sige, ano ang pangalan ng amino acid na yan? Or anong pangalan ng peptide na yan? Gly, val, and ala. Yung pagkakasunod natin. What will be the name of that amino acid? Sige, kanyan. Ayan, may sumagot na. Sorry, no, na full charge. Oligopeptide. Ayan, mukhang na-gets naman na. Ayan, na-gets naman. Na-gets ni Sashley. Na-gets na rin naman ni Jimrod, ni Angela, kapati. Ayan, so that will be, okay, may humabol pa. Kapag mali po, hindi ko na naintindihan yun ni Shin. So, this is glycyl valine alanine. Ayan, yan yung ating pangalan ng ating peptide, no? Glycyl, valyl, alanine. So papalitan nyo lang ng YL yung last syllables. Kung halimbawa tryptophan, tryptophan kasi amino acid. So tanggalin mo lang yung AN, gawin mong tryptopyl. So ganun lang naman siya. Okay? Then walang spaces walang spaces. Dire-diretso lang yung ating word. Ayan, correct naman, no? Ayan, buti na gets. So these combinations and this sequence is very important. Ay very important 'yan. Dapat tama 'yung sequence. The glycyl alanine and alanyl glycine are different. Kahit parehas pa contain kung ano yung kino-contain nila, this is two different peptide. Okay? For example, the insulin. Insulin contains around 51 amino acids. Therefore, it can have 1.55 times 10 to raise to 66. So imagine 1.55 or 155 add 64 zeros. Ganun kadami yung possible arrangement for those amino acids. But our body produces only one of the insulin, of that 51 amino acids. So one different amino acid can cause diseases, can be harmful in our body. So here are some example of common na mga hormones or peptides in our body. There are a lot of peptides in our body, more than 200, and day by day, they still discover other peptides in our body that have a valuable role in our body. So here are some, dalawa, the oxytocin and vasopressin. So oxytocin, ano tong hormone na to? Normally nakikita ko na to sa sa mga social media. What is oxytocin? What it is commonly known for? Ayan, Feb 14 kahapon. Diba? Feb 14 kahapon. Hormones. Sabi niya, hormones of happiness. Sabi ni Ralph. Ano pa ang ibang tawag? Tama naman yan, no? Happy hormones sa tinatawag ng iba dyan. Love hormone, ayan. Nagsagot ng love hormone, tama din. Kapag hindi pa toxic, no, yung relationship nyo. Oo, yan yung nire-release ng katawan. Oo, pag hindi pa toxic. Siyempre, pag toxic na. Diba? Yes, tama, Eliza. Halimbawa, nagka-cuddle kayo ng inyong jowa, ng inyong boyfriend, di ba? When you cuddle. Merong feeling na parang ang gaan. Parang ang gaan sa pakiramdam. Relaxing yung pakiramdam. It's because of oxytocin. Or hinag kayo ng inyong parent. Natuwa siya sa inyo. Na-perfect ninyo. Nauno kayo sa biochem. Hinag kayo ng inyong parent. Di ba? So, makaka-feel ka ng parang relaxing na effect. That is because of oxytocin. So this is the structure of our oxytocin. It contains 9 different peptides. Okay? Ayan, meron siyang cysteine, isoleucine, cortisol na kapag na-heartbroken. Ayan, no? Pag ano na, no? Pag hindi na siya nag-chat-chat, hindi na nagparamdam, cortisol na daw. Okay? Glutamine, leucine, glycine. Okay, then this is vasopressin. But aside from that, aside from the love hormone, yung oxytocin natin, yan, tama na may nagsagot na it causes the smooth muscle of the uterus to contract and ina-administer yung oxytocin to induce labor para mas madali no, na makapanganak yung ating parents. O kaya kung halimbawa kayo ay manganganak, yan, oxytocin ay pwedeng maka-help. Also, in mammary glands para ma-stimulate yung milk, no, para makalabas ng madali yung milk. Ayan. But it's also again considered as love hormone kasi nga it induces the feeling of relaxation, parang ganyan. no, yung oxytocin kapag pag may nag-release na oxytocin dun sa ating body. Vasopressin naman is an anti-diuretic hormone. Pag sinabi kasi natin na diuretic means it induces urination, frequent urination kapag diuretic. So vasopressin ay ini-intake yan or nire-release ng katawan natin para maiwasan na ma-dehydrate tayo. Okay? Yung vasopressin. Another hormone, the adrenocorticotropic hormone or the ACTH. So this is released in our pituitary gland and it regulates many steroid hormones. No? Kung paano ma-produce yung mga steroid hormones sa ating katawan. The ACTH. And here are some of other hormones that is present in our body that is also peptides that is also classified as proteins. So ACTH, ano ba familiar tayo dyan? Insulin, insulin present in the pancreas, the oxytocin, the gastrin that stimulates stomach to secrete acid. Okay, kaya pag may mga cases na acidic tayo, di ba? Kasi masyado na palang yung stomach natin na napupush na gumawa ng acid. Ayan. Another peptide or protein in our body is the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin contains alpha chains and beta chains. When you see AA, this is an abbreviation of amino acid. Okay? Kapag nakakita kayo ng AA, it means amino acid. Sa biochemistry, hindi sa battery. So sa biochemistry, pag nakita nyo AA, it simply means amino acid. So our hemoglobin contains alpha chains and beta chains. 141 times 2 plus 146 times 2 amino acid combinations. Okay? Ganyan yung hemoglobin natin. And each subunit contains a hemigroup. Okay? As you can see, ayan. Itong mga portion na yan. Ayan. Yan yung site kung saan yung iron, ito yan, pag zoom out natin, kung saan yung iron in our hemoglobin ay existing. So, dyan sa mga portion na yan. Ayan, yung mga parang web na yon. And our hemoglobin, kung titignan yung structure, para siyang donut, di ba? Clear ko nga muna. Para siyang donut. Diba? Parang ganyan yung structure niya, nung kanyang protein. Okay, so ganyan yung ating hemoglobin. Okay, so I discussed earlier na there are problem kapag nagkaroon, di ba, ng pagkakamali in DNA coding. So our DNA dictates what protein will be created by our body. So different proteins have different nucleotide combinations to be created. For example, yung hemoglobin natin, di ba? Meron siyang 141 times 2 saka 146 times 2 of different amino acids. If that hemoglobin, the glutamate, nigyan natin ng 1 amino acid difference in the 6. Di ba napaka-particular? 1 amino acid difference in the 6th position of the beta chains ng ating hemoglobin. Napalitan lang, no? The glutamate is replaced by valine. 1, okay? 1 amino acid lang yung napalitan. Nag-iiba yung shape of our hemoglobin. Normally, hemoglobin is like this, circular in shape. But for person with sickle cell anemia, the glutamate portion, that 1 amino acid in the 6th position, di ba napaka-particular, isa lang, na replaced with a valine. Nag-iba na yung shape ng hemoglobin natin. Naging sickle cell na ang itsura niya. Nag-itsurang sickle na siya. Ayan, sickle shape yung itsura niya. Anong masama dyan? Nahihirapan yung ating hemoglobin, yung ating blood, to pass through on different capillaries in our body. Okay? Nahihirapan siya na dumaan kung saan-saan, mag-flow sa ating circulatory system. Ngayon, because of that, the tendency of those cells nadi-destroy. Okay? Nadi-destroy yung mga cells because of that. Which is the reason bakit mababa ang red blood cell nung mga may sickle cell anemia. Kasi nasisira. Because their hemoglobin have different shape because, again, of one amino acid. The valine that replaced the glutamate. Okay? So napaka-importante na tama ang pagkaka-sequence of our DNA nung protein natin. Then this is a protein hydrolysis. When we say protein hydrolysis, the protein is broken down into smaller peptides, and that smaller peptides will be broken down into amino acids. Okay? How? By adding water with an acid or a base. So sa katawan natin, ganyan din yung nangyayari. Bakit? There are proteins that is recycled by our body. There are proteins that is resynthesized by our body. What our body do is they digest the protein with the help of the enzymes in our body. They convert it into smaller peptides, and that smaller peptides will be converted further into amino acids. Then those amino acids will be used by our cells, our tissues. Okay? By resynthesizing the proteins in our body or by simply recycling it. So this is the last part of our discussion, the protein denaturation. When you hear the word denatured, it means that it is not natural. Okay? Kasi yung protein natin, di ba, they have the natural formation. They have a natural shape. But there are certain conditions that can denature the proteins. Ibig sabihin, kung yan ay naka-alpha helix, kung yan ay naka-beta pleated sheets, may conditions na pwede kang i-apply dyan to remove those interactions between its molecules. Kaya nagiging denatured, protein siya. Kapag naman nag-clump together siya, we call that as precipitated protein. So there are different ways to denature protein. One is to expose it at high temperature. Another is by exposing it to different pH values. For example, an acid. Halimbawa, magluluto ka ng kinilaw na isda. Diba? Pag nagkilaw ka ng isda, when you put vinegar to raw fish, the texture of the protein will be different than the original. Because the protein is denatured. Okay, by the acid that you added. And most proteins are active at this range from 0 to 40 degrees Celsius. The body temperature of human is 37, right? 37 degrees Celsius. Higher than that, the tendency of these proteins, of these enzymes, of these hormones, they become highly active. That's why kapag high fever, di ba, pag sobrang taas ng fever, sometimes nagko-convulsion. Why? Because the proteins in our body, the enzymes and hormones, nagiging super active sila. And higher temperature, napapatay naman na. Napapatay na yung protein, nasisira yung protein. That is also the reason why when we sterilize utensils, we put those utensils in hot water because we want to denature the bacteria, the protein of the bacteria and the viruses. But there are some toxins, some viruses that cannot be killed by simply a boiling water or 100 degrees Celsius boiling water. Sometimes you need to expose those toxins, those viruses to much higher temperature, up to 1000 degrees Celsius for a few minutes. Actually, parang sinunog mo na, 'di ba, yung protein niya at 100 degrees Celsius. Sunog 'yan. So there are some toxins and bacteria and viruses that can only be killed at that temperature. For example, diphtheria, tetanus. Okay, we can deactivate those toxins and viruses at very high temperature. And heat denaturation is used to deactivate the viruses. For example, kapag gumagawa ng vaccine, when manufacturers create vaccines in the previous times, no? Ngayon kasi meron ng ibang way to create vaccines, but in the previous time, they denature the protein of that disease or of that virus by exposing it to high temperature. Then that denatured protein will be exposed to the body of a person to be vaccinated. Then our body will create an antibody for that particular denaturated protein. That denaturated protein will not cause harm or will not cause that that sickness or disease. You may experience some symptoms pero hindi na siya ganun kalethal or ganun kagrabe. Kasi denatured na siya, deactivated na, inactive na yung protein of that virus. So kaya nang gumawa ng immunity ng ating katawan. Which is mas may... Sige, mamaya natin sagutin yan. Tapusin muna natin, no? So another way to denature protein is by adding heavy metal salts or heavy metal ions. So yung protein kasi, they are attracted with these metals, with heavy metals, ayan, silver, lead, mercury. Nagre-react sila with the sulfur and carboxylate groups of our proteins. Which is also the reason kapag halimbawa naka-ingest ng heavy metal, for example, mercury, accidentally, ang first aid for that is to eat raw egg white plus milk. Because the raw egg white and milk contains proteins. And those proteins will react with the heavy metal to form a complex, a metal ion complex. In that way, those heavy metal will not be absorbed by our body, but by that protein, by the raw egg white and milk. So pwede na niyang i-vomit, pwedeng i-pump out doon sa patient kung halimbawa nagkaroon ng heavy metal poisoning. Again, why? Because protein is attracted towards this heavy metal, or they cause a reaction for those protein. Nagbabind yung mga yan, yung mga heavy metals na yan sa proteins natin. So here are some substances and condition. Nabanggit na natin yung iba dyan. Heat, di ba? Pag high temperature, nade-denature ang protein, nagre-react ang protein. Kapag masyado tayong na-expose sa ultraviolet light, di ba? Umiitim, nasa sunburn, nagpipil yung skin kapag sobrang exposure sa light. No? Kasi yung protein nagre-react. Okay? Then organic solvents, as I've mentioned earlier, the vinegar, it contains an acetic acid, around 4 to 6% normally of acetic acid. It reacts also with proteins, acids, and bases. Diba? The reason why I always recommend that you wear gloves during laboratory experiment when you're handling strong acids and bases, because those acids and bases will react with your skin because your skin is made of protein. Detergents. There are some detergents that also disrupt hydrogen bonds, ionic interaction, hydrophobic interactions. If you ever tried to wash your clothes using a strong detergent, the tendency is your wrist, 'di ba? Yung wrist natin magkakasugat pag strong masyado yung detergent na ginamit. One, because there are some detergent that they add additional enzyme. And two is because detergent itself can disrupt the protein, no, the structure of the protein. Kaya nasusugatan tayo pag tayo ay nagwa-wash ng clothes because of some detergents, no, not all detergents naman. And finally, the heavy metal ions also interacts with proteins. So any questions? May questions dito, medyo mahaba. Ang egg, maraming protein. Ang egg ay maraming protein. Ang egg ay marami ring lipids, no? Lalo na egg yolk na portion niya. Pag kumain ka naman ng egg during may flu ka or any ano, hindi naman agad-agad yan kasi ma-absorb no ng iyong katawan. And mahaba pang process actually para mas mahaba pa yung process para ma-convert into biomolecules that will be converted into your in your body. Mahaba-habang proseso pa 'yan. Sa ano natin midterm no, madi-discuss yung mga process na 'yan. So, ipa-process pa 'yan ng ano mo, ng stomach mo, ang tagal pa niyan bago ma-digest. Okay? Yung init, normally nagko-cause ng init sa body natin kapag fat, madalas kapag masyadong mataas ang fat. For example, yung egg yolk, mataas ang fat niyan. O kaya nag-overdose ka ng mga vitamin A, D, E, K. Ayan, pana-overdose ka rin doon. Yan, pwede ring uminit yung katawan mo. No? May kakilala na akong gano'n na overdose sa ano kasi. Yeah, pero matagal pang process yan. Okay, pero kaya hindi naman agad-agad makaka-affect yan. Okay, any questions?